This is the HAPPYMODEL MOBEETLE6, and many people argue it's the best tiny whoop you can get today. Whether you agree or disagree with that sentiment, you got to admit, it's the most popular. I don't have any data to prove that, but I think it's true. Good enough. And this is the HAPPYMODEL MOBEETLE6, the successor to the MOBEETLE6. And there are some things about the Mobeetle that everyone would agree are improvements. For example, it has much longer video and control range than the MOBEETLE6, and it is significantly lighter. What's not to like? Well, what's not to like? Ask Angry Don, the HAPPYMODEL team pilot who worked to develop the MOBEETLE6. He's come out on social media and basically lambasted it, pointing out all the ways that HAPPYMODEL didn't develop it to his exact, precise spec. But is he just being like super picky, like top racers and pilots always are? And maybe the MOBEETLE6 is actually still pretty good, even though it's not exactly what Angry Don wanted to make. Or maybe you should just buy a MOBEETLE6 instead. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Here's the number one thing that makes the Mobeetle so freaking amazing. The flight controller. It's the HAPPYMODEL Diamond F4 flight controller, and it's small and lightweight. It has a 5 amp ESC built in for the brushless motors, and what makes it really stand out in my mind is it can be ordered with built-in Express LRS. So you get much better range and penetration than the FreeSky, typically FreeSky based receivers that are built into most tiny whoops. The video transmitter also stands out. It's 400 milliwatts and it uses the Open VTX code, which means it's technically open source, but the bottom line is this is an all-in-one flight controller for your tiny whoop with built-in Express LRS and built-in 400 milliwatt video transmitter. That's incredible. And that alone, like, I kind of almost don't care how it flies. Obviously I care how it flies and we're going to see it fly, but my God, there were people buying this quad just for the video, or just for the flight controller, because you couldn't, it was out of stock everywhere. And they were like, screw it, I'll just buy the whole freaking drone and take the flight controller out and do whatever I want with it. It's so freaking good. The other major change they've made is to go from 0802 motors on the MOBEETLE6 to 0702 motors on the Mobeetle. And that means that the Mobeetle motors are 1 millimeter smaller in diameter than the MOBEETLE6 motors. And that means that they have less torque and less power. And that's part of the reason why you see the Mobeetle ships with bi-blade props instead of the tri-blade props that people usually use on the MOBEETLE6. I have heard from some people who say that the 0702 motors can handle a light tri-blade prop. And in fact, Patrick Clark, the tuner from Project Mockingbird, says he really loves it. But other people I've talked to say, nah, you really need to stick to bi-blades. And that's going to affect the handling, although the reduction in thrust from the bi-blade props, say that 3 times fast, the reduction in thrust from the bi-blade props is going to be somewhat offset by the lighter weight. Another change that's a little bit harder to notice is that the Mobeetle's motors are uni-bell. It's a single piece aluminum bell, whereas the MOBEETLE6 motors, let's take a closer look. The MOBEETLE6 motors, you can see the top is a separate piece from this outer cylinder, and on larger motors that can result in the cylinder separating and coming down, but some people argue that it's not as much of an issue on these smaller motors. Angry Don actually has some strong opinions on this that we'll get to later in the video when we address his complaints about the MOBEETLE6. The Mobeetle is significantly lighter than the MOBEETLE6. Mobeetle comes in at 18 grams without a battery. The MOBEETLE6 comes in at 21 grams. And before you think, 3 grams, who freaking cares? That's more than 10% of the weight of the quadcopter. It does make a difference in the handling. Now, these little pieces of wire here are a little bit controversial. In order to save weight, they have used those little soldered on wire antennas instead of giving you a UFL connector for a proper circular polarized antenna, and instead of using a ceramic antenna like the EP2 Express LRS receivers. This does reduce the weight, but it also reduces the range. And if you're going to have a 400 milliwatt video transmitter, how much are you losing by having kind of a crappy wire antenna? Well, we'll see. We'll do some range and comparisons a little later in the video. But there definitely are people who would prefer that we had a UFL antenna and prefer that we had a ceramic Express LRS antenna for durability reasons, if not range and penetration reasons. If you do manage to damage one of these wires the good news is that you just have to solder on another piece of wire. Don't just go get a piece of copper wire off your bench. It has to be enamel wire or motor winding wire. It's coated in an enamel coating that makes, it's basically like plastic sheathing, but it's enamel. As long as it's the right length, it's relatively simple to solder it back on. You might want to measure that length. Okay, for the record, this one on the left side is about 30, probably 31 millimeters when you take into account that little bit of bend. That's going to be the 2.4 gigahertz antenna. And this one on the right side is about 18 millimeters. That's going to be the 5 gigahertz one for the video. If you do have to repair one of these, the best thing to do is to cut the wire long, then solder it on, then measure the length and cut it to length, because of course you're going to have a little bit of wiggle when you solder it on. The canopy on the Mobeetle is a novel weight-saving design. It's printed out of TPU. It does have fixed up tilt. However, you can change the up tilt by moving this screw position. I don't know if it's clear here, but there's additional screw holes here, and by just changing which screw hole goes through, the camera will get more or less up tilt. The box does come with a standard Mobeetle6 canopy. There are some people who feel that that's more durable than this plastic canopy, which can like let the camera smack into the main board. Don has some recommended upgrades and improvement that you make on day one, and I'm going to put a link to that video in the video description. I'm not going to be doing those things because I kind of want to fly it out of the box like many people will and see how it comes out. But if you want to get the best reliability and performance out of it, definitely check out Angry Don's video, linked down in the video description below. Alrighty folks, here's going to be the course. You ready for it? We're going to come around the back side of this cube. Thank you, Gem Fan. We're going to go tight left here, back through, tight right. I want to get one-sided. We're going to sweep around here and come through the table. We're going to go through the high side here, then come down and through the low side. Then through this tunnel of Mobeetle gates. Thank you, Mobeetle. Then we're going to come up here and use this environmental obstacle. We're going to drop down and tight around the Race Day Quads gate, back through here, and do it again. For this part, if I drop down too low, I'm going to hit these chairs and they're going to suck me under and I'm not going to be able to get up. So you really got to control altitude there and not drop in too tight. See? Losing altitude. 3.4. We got another lap in us. Keep that nice and tight. Picking up speed there. Through there. Okay. Stay nice and high. Don't get eaten by the chairs. Keep it tight there. Okay, tight there. There you go, Bardwell. There you go. That's looking real good, and that is a pack. That is a pack. The Mobeetle. Well, the camera is significantly worse in the dark, I'll tell you that. Let's just take a couple passes around here and see how it flies. It feels less powerful. But, oh yeah, immediately less powerful, geez. Man, I can hear the PID tune straining, the little oscillations of the motors, high frequency oscillations. They got this thing tuned within an inch of its life. I am not really going fast enough to push it as much as other people might, but that's so much better. Aww. Now you might have noticed I was struggling a little bit with altitude control when I switched to the Mobeetle, and it didn't feel like that was happening with the Mobeetle6. And I think that had something to do with the weight of the batteries I was using. I am running NubiDrone Nitro Nectar 300 milliamp hour packs, and I gotta say, these are the best tiny whoop packs you can get. You can buy them from Drone, but the exact same pack, well, like I don't know that it's the same pack, but it sure seems like it's the same pack, is sold also by We Bleed FPV and by Tattoo. I'll put links down in the video description where you can pick them up if you're interested in Tiny Whoops. They're just the batteries to have. I was reluctant to give up my beloved Nitro Nectar Gold batteries, but I felt I owed it to Angry Don to give it a try. So I put on the Happy Model batteries that come with the quad. They're about 2 grams lighter than the Nitro Nectar Gold batteries. And sure enough, the quad got a lot more controllable. And the performance wasn't even that bad. You can see here that I had flight times of about, what's on this battery, 4 minutes, 32 seconds. That's pretty respectable for a Tiny Whoop battery. Now it's time to see what really separates the Mobeetle from the Mobeetle6 and other Tiny Whoops that came before it. Because the Mobeetle has Express LRS on board, and that means you're going to get way more range and penetration on your control link than the FreeSky control link that's on most Tiny Whoops. But none of that matters if you lose video. Who cares if you haven't fail-safed your control link if you can't see where you're flying? And most Tiny Whoops have a 25 milliwatt or maybe a 200 milliwatt video transmitter at most. But the Mobeetle has a 400 milliwatt video transmitter, which means we should be able to fly like pretty much anywhere we want to fly on my property. I'm not sure I've ever been able to do that with a Tiny Whoop before. Now, when I test quote-unquote long range, which really isn't that long, I know, but when I do this test, what I like to do is fly off my property down towards this ridge line. And you see me doing a little safety turn here to see if I'm going to lose video when I turn around and put the antenna behind me, and I didn't, so I keep going. I'll do a little safety turn here, and the video nearly completely drops out, so I'm going to go ahead and turn around and come back. That's how far I got. And if this was a larger quad, that would be pathetic. But for a Tiny Whoop, to be able to go this far is really impressive. And bear in mind, I'm not standing on my porch where I sometimes stand. I'm actually standing here, I'll show you, all the way down here, right? So yeah, that's really impressive range for a Tiny Whoop, I gotta say. Now, as far as the control link goes, I am running at 50 hertz and I am using the HAPPYMODEL Pro module at 1 watt output power. So this is absolutely the best case scenario when it comes to control link range. If you have a controller with only 250 milliwatts output power, you're going to get a little bit less range. And if you're racing and you choose to run at 250 hertz or 500 hertz, you'll get better latency, but also a little bit less range. The point here, I think, and I think this is always the case with Express LRS, is that you have the choice. You can choose low latency with reduced range. You can choose high latency with extended range, and you have the option to use high-powered modules to get even better range. This is hands down the best range I've ever seen on a Tiny Whoop, both in terms of the video link and in terms of the control link. It's pretty freaking amazing. Well, it wouldn't be a good review if I didn't tell you some negative things about the product. And this is going to be a tricky section of the video for me to get right, because I have a few criticisms of this quad. They're relatively mild, and overall, my impression is positive, not to spoil the ending. But the designer of this quad, Angry Don, who partnered with HAPPYMODEL to make it, has some big criticisms of it. And I've talked to other people who fly Tiny Whoops way more seriously than I do, way more often than I do, and they also have some small things they would do to improve it. I'm going to tell you about all of that, but I want you to keep in mind a piece of advice someone once gave me, which is you always have to consider the perspective of the person who's giving you the advice. If the person who's giving you the advice is a hardcore Tiny Whoop racer, they may have different standards or different priorities for what they want out of it. And so despite the fact that they may have strong criticism, it may not necessarily apply to you. Here's my criticism of this quad. The quad comes with these HAPPYMODEL 300 milliamp hour packs, and they were fine in terms of performance. They're probably not like top tier, but I didn't notice any problems with them. But the thing that makes them stand out is that they have this battery lead on them, and of course they plug in to the battery lead on the Tiny Whoop, on the Mobeetle. If you choose to use a pack with no battery lead, like this Drone Nitro Nectar, then the provided lead is just barely long enough to just barely plug in, and the whole time you're plugged in it's under tension and it's just not a good scene. Although it does keep the battery from sliding out, and that's another criticism, is that this is a criticism of all of these frames. The battery doesn't really stay in. You can add a rubber band or you can add a little piece of padding if you prefer. Some people are putting longer battery leads on here because they like to use this style of battery. You would definitely want to put a longer battery lead on there if you did that regularly. Now we got to discuss the criticisms of Angry Don FPV, the original creator of this product. And you got to ask yourself, how much can you really trust a product if the very creator has criticized it aggressively? And he has criticized it aggressively out there on the internet. We can take a look at this video, World's Lightest 14-gram Tiny Whoop. I'll put a link in the video description. It's 9 minutes long, so we're not going to watch the whole thing. But it shows what Angry Don was going for when he started designing the quadcopter that eventually became the Mobeetle. And we can see that he was trying to build a very different quadcopter than we've ended up with here with the Mobeetle. For example, his design was just 20 grams all up weight. The Mobeetle is 25 grams. Angry Don feels that the uni-bell motors on the Mobeetle are just marketing hype. That two-piece motors are better because they can have better cooling, because you can have better venting, and because the increased durability of the uni-bell doesn't really matter when you're flying a tiny whoop that has prop guards on it, so the motors shouldn't really be taking hits. It seems like many of the things that Angry Don criticizes are just a really, really passionate person being really, really picky. And there's always a trade-off between the product that the engineers want to make back in the lab and the product that is actually sold and is best for the average consumer. And that, I think, is how I would start to sum up this product. Before I sum up the product, I got to acknowledge one other thing that comes in the box, which is this carbon fiber frame. You can swap out the standard Tiny Whoop frame for an open prop design carbon fiber frame, and it makes it fly way, way freaking better. But I'm not even covering that here because it also, like, if you are a great pilot who never crashes, then this is fantastic. But literally everybody I talked to, I asked them, would you fly this indoors? And they said no, because even these tiny motors, you'll be cutting up the fabric of your couch or your furniture, you'll be marking up your walls. The kind of just go hog wild and bounce off the walls flying that tiny whoop pilots really prefer to do, they felt like they wouldn't feel comfortable doing it on a frame like this. There is a place for a frame like that. If you look at the Rotor Riot Babito, which is Bubby FPV's new version of that same thing, or the Newbie Drone Mosquito, which is very, very similar, people rip the hell out of these things. They fly so good right up until you crash, and then you're sort of marking up the walls and tearing up the furniture and getting it in somebody's hair. So that's a trade-off you might be willing to make, and it is included if you want to make the swap. But we're not going to be covering that in this review. We're just going to be treating this like a traditional tiny whoop. The Mobeetle6 is the most popular tiny whoop today and is extremely good. The tune that comes on it out of the box is very good, and if you don't like the tune, there's a lot of other people who have tuned the Mobeetle6, and you can get a very, very good tune that probably suits your needs. The main criticisms of the Mobeetle6 are, number one, the 25,000 kV motors are probably more powerful than a lot of pilots are going to be able to fully take advantage of, including me. You can solve that with a motor output limit in beta flight, and you can make it less powerful. But obviously, you know, if you have a super high kV motor that you're dialing down, it might be better to just have a lower kV motor to start with. The other main criticism of this guy is the video range and the control link range with the SPI based receiver and the, I believe it's a 200 milliwatt video transmitter. Still respectable, but it could be a lot better. When we come to the Mobeetle, I love this thing so much for its flight controller. The built-in Express LRS and the built-in 400 milliwatt video transmitter finally make me able to fly a tiny whoop without constantly being anxious that I'm going to fail-safe or lose video. No, you don't get as much range as you would on a larger quad with a proper antenna, but you get a lot of range, more than I've ever experienced on any tiny whoop. But I think that for a typical beginner pilot, for sure, you're not going to care because you don't need more power. And even for a mid-tier racer, if you're not consistently hitting full throttle when you're racing, it's not the motors that are holding you back. I think you're going to have pretty good results, and the lighter weight is going to make a difference in the maneuverability and the flight time of the quad. A lot of people, though, are buying this just because the flight controller is so freaking good. And then they're upgrading the powertrain. Put the 30,000 kV motors. Heck, you could put 0802 motors on it if that's what you prefer. You could do whatever you want with the motors. That's a relatively easy change to make. The main person I would steer away from the Mobeetle would be somebody who was looking to do indoor freestyle. And that's a shame because Angry Don really designed this quad first and foremost for indoor flying and freestyle. And so for it to sort of miss that target when that's what he specifically wanted is a bit of a shame. But the lack of power down low and the lack of mass and flingability is going to affect the ability to do freestyle in a little bit of a negative way. Again, that could be solved by modding the design, but if you wanted something out of the box that was going to freestyle, you're definitely, I think, going to steer more towards something like the Mobeetle6. I'm going to put links to this product down in the video description, and I sure would appreciate it if you use those links. If this content was valuable, helped you learn about the product, helped you make a buying decision, those links down below are affiliate links. And what that means is that when you click that link and then make any purchase at the affiliated store, I get a small commission. So you want to pick up the Mobeetle, click that link, go buy a Mobeetle. Want to buy a Mobeetle6, click that link, go buy a Mobeetle6, or just click those links to those affiliated stores before you do any of your shopping as an easy way to support the channel. Doesn't cost you anything, just take the time to click the link. I'm also going to put a link to my review of the Mobeetle6. Here's a thing that is missing for the Mobeetle, and that is the ability to run EmuFlight. EmuFlight is an alternative flight control software similar to Betaflight, but it's based on Betaflight but improved, and it has some TinyWhoop specific features that many people feel makes it the best firmware for TinyWhoops. But the problem is it doesn't support SPI-based Express LRS receivers yet. At least not at the time that I'm recording this, which means you cannot put EmuFlight on this Mobeetle. Well, how much of a difference does that make? There's a card on screen here to the video where I compared Betaflight and EmuFlight on the Mobeetle6 to see which was better, and you're definitely going to want to check that out. I'll see you there.